Across Africa, conversations about democracy, justice and reparations are taking centre stage. Right now in Midrand, a third civil society parliamentary dialogue is underway, bringing together leaders, lawmakers and civil society groups to strengthen democracy, peace building and accountability across the continent. With 2025 declared the Year of Reparations by the African Union, this dialogue seeks to turn reflection into action, from justice for Africans and people of African descent to stronger citizen engagement. Joining us online via Teams from the Centre for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria is Bonolo Makgale to unpack this, what this gathering means for Africa's democratic future. A very good afternoon to you, Bonolo. Let's start with the basics. This dialogue is underway right now at Midrand. For those who are unfamiliar, what is the Civil Society Parliamentary Dialogue and why is it such an important gathering for Africa at this moment in time?
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me. The Civil Society Parliamentary Dialogue is essentially a space to gather civil society organizations from across the continent to have a conversation and a dialogue with members of the Pan-African Parliament. And this idea comes from the Constitutive Act of the African Union, and of course, the protocol that established the Pan-African Parliament itself. Article 17 of that protocol speaks to a participatory civil society in the workings of the Pan-African Parliament. And so the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria has been working with the Pan-African Parliament for the past 8 years. And part of the work that we've been doing with the Pan-African Parliament is really to establish formal mechanisms of engagement by civil society organizations, by African citizens and the Parliament. And so this dialogue today is our third dialogue, but before this dialogue, we've of course have had other meetings on the sidelines of the Pan-African Parliament ordinary sittings. And so this year, we really have gathered civil society organizations from different parts of this continent to have a conversation about democracy, to have a conversation about peace and security challenges that we're facing on the continent, but also to figure out as a collective, as African citizens who care about pressing matters of this continent, to have that conversation with members of the Pan-African Parliament based on the fact that the protocol of the African Union affords us and provides us this opportunity, not just as a constitutive matter, but really as a matter for us to figure, solutions for Africa as a collective.
Now, this year's theme aligns with the African Union's declaration of 2025 as the Year of Reparations. What does reparations mean in a practical sense for Africans and people of African descent, and how does it now tie into democracy and human rights?
Well, we've been talking, even this morning, Madam Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma really spoke strongly about the idea of justice, reparative justice, and almost granted back that which was taken away from Africans and people of African descent. And then tying it to the conversation of democracy, which I think is a very important conversation, given what we see happening on the continent largely, where the continent is really witnessing something very troubling. We are seeing a lot of military coups. We are seeing issues around unconstitutional changes of governments, right? And I think what we need to highlight here is that the issue here is not just overthrowing governments. The issue here is a challenge in the very essence of democracy, is the challenge around what do citizens think about democracy at this point where we are as Africans. We're seeing young people in West Africa, in Mali, in Burkina Faso. We see young people in really different parts of this continent, even in Nairobi, even in what happened in Madagascar, even what's currently happening in Tanzania, where young people are really saying, we've got these democratic institutions, we've got elections that don't really mean much. How do we move forward as Africans to ensure that we get to enjoy the dividends of democracy? Because as we see it currently, we are not enjoying the dividends of democracy. And so this is not just an issue, as I mentioned, it's not just an issue of military coups, it's not just an issue of overthrowing governments. I think it's a story of legitimacy in crisis. I think it's a story of a social contract that is under strain. And these are the conversations that we want to have with African leaders today to say, how do we reimagine democracy for Africa, given all these unprecedented challenges that we are confronted with, conflicts in Sudan, conflicts in Eastern DRC, democratic challenges in the Sahel.
As you make mention of those countries, I mean, the dialogue focuses on strengthening the relationship between the Pan-African Parliament and civil society organizations. Why is that connection so critical, and how well is it really working in practical terms?
One of the things that we realize to be a challenge at the moment is this idea of a relevant Pan-African Parliament, a Pan-African Parliament that really fulfills the mandate granted to it by the African Union. And so part of the challenge here is that we've been seeing that there's a linkage between the Pan-African Parliament as a continental parliament and domestic parliaments. So members of the Pan-African Parliament come to Midrand 4 times a year to deliberate on issues that affect the continent. But we're seeing a gap, a democratic gap here, where members of the Pan-African Parliament don't take these matters to their domestic parliament. And so this conversation is important because we want to strengthen this linkage and this relationship of members of the Pan-African Parliament with African citizens, for it to start here in Midrand at the headquarters of the parliament, and for it to then go find expression at domestic parliaments, where members go back and say, these are things that were addressed and discussed in Midrand, and how do we ensure that these things find expression in our different jurisdictions involving African citizens.
Very well. Thank you so much. Thanks for speaking to us this afternoon. Bonolo Makgale, Center for Human Rights from the University of Pretoria, giving us a sense of that big story.